Welcome, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. I think we'll just go ahead and admit folks as they arrive, but we'll get started. Thank you so much for joining the students that are here. My name is Stephanie. I'm part of the Beyond Barnard team that manages all different kinds of events like this where we bring alums to campus, virtually, of course, in this case, to talk to you all about what they do, how they do it, and how they got there. This particular event is on part of our media focus series, or journalism, communications, and media, regarding networking and mentoring specifically. So we're going to go ahead and record this session so that you can listen to it afterwards if you'd like. I will first ask our two wonderful panelists that have joined us here today, Lauren and Maddy, to introduce yourself, tell us your major, your graduation year if you want, and then kind of give us the sort of 2-minute pitch on where you work and what you do. We'll start off like that.
I'll start.
Lauren, go for it. Yep.
My name is Lauren Ishida. I graduated in 2008, and I'm double majored in music and psychology, mostly because I loved music. I didn't know how to turn it into a career, though, and psychology seemed a bit more stable, and I also really liked it, and so I ended up there. I currently work as Director of Promotion for Boozy and Hawks, which is a classical music publisher, and I work with our international catalogs. So I represent basically all these catalogs that don't have homes or don't have offices in the US. So names like Schott and Barnard and Faber, Zenon, from all over the world. And I just work with their composers, and we try to get classical music performed around the world, which is really fun. So that's what I do in a nutshell.
It's going to be hard to follow that because it sounds so exciting and creative. So I'm going to take us down a notch, but
I've
I'm
seen your
Maddy.
bio. I don't think that's true. Sorry to interrupt.
I'm Maddy Martinez, formerly Bella when I was at Barnard. I graduated in 2015, majoring in human rights and sociology. I'll be honest with you, I came into Barnard thinking that psychology was what sociology is. So it took me a little bit of a turn to figure out what I was passionate about. Currently, I am the head of financial and crisis communications at eBay. Hopefully, you all are familiar with eBay. We're really trying to penetrate with younger generations, just like you all. But in a nutshell, my job is really about managing high stakes corporate events. So in bad times, crisis and issues. In normal course times, those boring quarterly earnings calls that you hear public company CEOs talking on, where they talk about the performance for the quarter, any sort of profits that we put up, and all that fun stuff. So not as exciting as classical music, super corporate, but happy to provide that perspective today.
Absolutely, and that's a part of this, right? Different ways to use these kinds of skills and tasks, right? In an industry that spans all kinds of interests. Maddy, I would argue there's plenty of interest to be had on your side of the aisle, without question. So thank you so much for those intros. Again, welcome and thanks for joining us. Because this panel is to talk about mentoring and networking, mentorship, mentoring, networking. The first question is kind of how did you get to your current role? Tell us a little bit more about your role, but how did you get there? What helped you get there? Internships that you might have had, folks you may have talked to. What were some of the stepping stones that helped make it happen for you?
Sure. Do you want me to take this one since Lauren went first? Okay, great. If this were a job interview, I would give you all a really polished answer that talked about how strategic I was every time I made a pivot in my career and every time I've changed jobs. For your context, I have pivoted, so it's possible. But I'm going to let you in on some of the inside baseball today. I think like one through line throughout my experience has just been openness to opportunity. So I don't think that I would have gotten my first job without the internship I had in college. So just to take you back to my time at Barnard, I actually volunteered on Andrew Cuomo's campaign. I started my career in politics, if you could believe it. And that actually led me to my first job post-graduation, which was at the Economic Development Agency for New York State. So I worked within the Cuomo administration. I landed in the public affairs office, which is the public sector's way of saying communications. Landed there because I thought it would be interesting, not because I necessarily even knew what comms was about, and just being very honest with this group today. While I was there, and something that I think a lot of you will probably experience once you're postgraduate, you get into your mid-20s. It was that period of time where my peers, my former classmates, all decided one day they were going to get their MBAs. I was like, do I go to law school? I always thought I'd be a lawyer. So I was sort of sitting at that intersection. And what I realized is I actually really like to work. I like the hands-on application of work. And so instead of, I did sit for the LSAT twice, so I'll be honest with you, decided I didn't want to be a lawyer because it sounded boring. And so I tried my hand at a PR agency called Joel Frank, where I specialized in financial and crisis communications. So that covered things like mergers and acquisitions, which is like corporate transactions, shareholder activism, which I don't know if any of you have seen, like Succession, for example. Now we can like talk about these things more broadly, but when an investor takes a position in a company and wants to oust your CEO or nominate directors or in some cases, even hostily take over your company. So that type of fun stuff. I also worked on some reputation management and ongoing corporate communications work. And interestingly enough, my now husband decided to go to business school at the same time. And I'll be honest with you, some of the projects that I was engaged on and some of the clients I worked with were case studies that he studied at Wharton. So I kind of felt vindicated that I was getting that hands-on experience. From there, it was funny. It was a combination of COVID, which I know was a dark time for all of us, and the 24/7 nature of client services and then client service with crisis, where I just sort of had this moment and I was working with this little startup, which I typically didn't do. I had no business working with technology companies, but they just sort of came into the firm. I was helping them with a capital raise to try to get them to a Series B. I totally fell in love with the culture of the company. I was ready to quit this big PR job, and I just really boldly asked the CEO if he would hire me in-house. So that's how I started my tech journey. I was working at a startup that was called TCG Player. It was a marketplace for trading card games. Again, I'm a child in the 90s, so like I'm familiar with Pokemon cards, but I'm by no means a collector of them. Magic the Gathering was new to me, but that's the type of the stuff that we sold. Instead of getting a Series B raise, I was able to help them get a buyout with eBay. So that's how I actually got to eBay in a runaround way. I stayed on, did some integration work, also led communications and corporate affairs for TCG Player as they were sort of becoming a subsidiary of eBay. And then this opportunity opened up on the corporate communications team for eBay Corporate, which felt like a homecoming for me. So I went back into the world of crisis and financial now at eBay on the corporate side. Again, like I can make that sound really strategic for you all, but it's just opportunities opened up as they opened up. And I think one thing that was critically important through all of that was just the power of relationships. My business is like very relationship driven. But I would not have had any of those opportunities come available to me if not for the work that I did to nurture them. So, like, for example, boldly calling the CEO of a startup and asking for a job. That was pretty bold, but we had a good relationship and he was super excited to bring me on board. Similarly, when this role opened up on the eBay corporate side and I was going back into the world of financial and crisis, it was because of the strong relationships that I built while I was at the subsidiary, also like my demonstrated work that was able to lead me to that role. And then also a fun fact about that is I even called my old PR agency because they had a relationship with the chief communications officer at eBay. So it's just funny when you boil it down what a small world it is and how so much of it is relationship driven. So I tried to keep that tight and in a nutshell, but let me know of questions and I'll pass it over to Lauren.
Well, yeah, no, that's fascinating, Maddie. I also have quite a pivoting story. So when I got to Barnard, I knew I was extremely passionate about music. I've always loved it, and but I also was very interested in psychology, and I was trying to figure out a way to make a career in some area. And in music, I sort of only knew about either you come out of college, you perform, or you teach, like as a PhD level musicologist or something. And I both of those weren't really options for me. I didn't see myself in either of those scenarios. And I fell in love with psychology. So I ended up doing a lot of teaching assistant work at Barnard. So I worked in the psychopharmacology classes with Professor McCaskill. I worked in the lab of Steve Stressner. I did my final thesis project with Walter Mischel, who's the sort of the marshmallow experiment, brilliant, genius, amazing psychologist who just he passed away several years ago, but he was just this giant in the field, and I fell in love with this work. And so when I was at Barnard, I did an internship that eventually turned into a job at the Mount Sinai Eating and Weight Disorders program, and that was the area that I chose to study. I went through a few. I worked at Metropolitan Hospital in the methadone clinic. I went all over. But I found this home, and I was really kind of on track to apply to graduate school in clinical psychology. That was where I thought I would end up, and I thought, this is great. I'm really interested and really passionate about it. But in the back of my mind, I was sort of always thinking, well, I wonder like what else there is in music. And I would find that, for example, when we would have vacation days, I would be going to these symposiums, or I'd be going to these like choral workshops, or like all these sorts of things. And I kept saying, you're really passionate about this. How can you integrate this into your life? And then I realized that Hunter College was just a few subway stops away from Mount Sinai. So I thought, you know what, they have this evening program. It's like a master's program in music, and why not just like go see what that's about? And worst comes to worst, I'll have studied this thing that I like. So while I was there, I realized that I really fell in love with that world, and that's where I wanted to be. And fortunately, as I was there, the performance program started a new American opera company, and they specialized basically in new American operas, working with living composers or like very late 20th century works. And the director there was really wonderful. There were two directors, wonderful mentors, people who were like, hey, you're really passionate about this thing, here, let's give you this thing to try to work on. And so I became the production manager of the company. We had a tiny shoestring budget to begin with, I mean, as you would imagine. So I started doing all these different things, many things I didn't have any experience with, like writing press releases and dealing with the press, dealing with publishers and composers, and all sorts of managing rehearsals. I mean, all sorts of things, even prop shopping. I mean, like, but you kind of got thrown into it. And it was great because it was a great way to just learn all of these skills all at once in a relatively low stress environment. I did that for a few years, and I was trying to figure out, so I met my husband at Hunter, actually, and so we ended up getting married, and then I was still working with the opera company, but then I took some time off to have my two kids, who are now 12 and 10, and as I was coming back, I still stayed, I write for a new music blog, I do some things that I kept up with while I was kind of on maternity or like home leave with my kids, but as I was coming back, I was looking for a position where I could use the skills that I was passionate about. I had learned from my experience at Hunter that there was this whole music business world that I had never considered. My perception of music business, not knowing the world, was always that it's business people who happen to like the arts, and I thought, oh, I don't have the training in that. That's not my world. And then I realized that there's this field, there's publishing, there's artist management, there's so many things, and it's not like you need to go to a specific school for any of those one things. You have to have a good skill set, but I think I had that, and so when a position opened up in publishing, that's when I applied, and it was great. My mentors at Hunter with the opera company were great, and they actually, of course, it's a very small field, they knew each other. It was like, yes, she can do this kind of work, and so I felt really confident going in, and I've been with the company now for about 8 years. And I learned this sort of publishing specific things, but again, like Maddy said, being open to new opportunities and experiences, that's really important, because in many fields, I know certainly in the arts, but in many fields in general, things are not this like linear path. Maybe if you're going to medical school, maybe in law, but in most cases, things open up, and like you said too, Maddy, I think the relationship aspect of it too. You meet someone and you go, oh, I really want to work for that person. And actually, when I was interviewing for my position, there were two jobs that I was offered at the same time. And one was at the publishing company and one was at another company, also very good. But it was this sort of relationship. Like I met the president of the company. I thought, this is the person I want to work with. I know that I will be here for a long time if we're working together. And my instinct was right there. So, it's a combination of having the background, all my work at Barnard, all the writing, all the knowledge I got from the major was really important, because if you're going to work, for example, in my field in classical music, you need to know that background. You need to have an understanding of like what the field in general. But then past that, it's just a matter of networking, meeting people, figuring out out what kind of skills you can put into different jobs. It's like it's not always straightforward. And I think that's the thing, that if you're open to different ideas and different, like, oh, I could see myself there, you might end up in a place you never even considered. So that's what I found. It was very, very convoluted. Sometimes I tell people, yeah, I was working in an eating and weight disorders clinic, and then now I'm that was my job beforehand. So it's interesting. You never know where you'll end up. So
Those are both really great answers, and I think highlights something that we think about and talk about so much here at Beyond Barnard, which is really about relationship building. Networking can be kind of a scary word for a lot of folks, but I put it right there in the title of this event specifically because we want to talk about why it can be about building community, building relationships, and then learning, right? That these connections you make with people don't have to be A to B to C, that it can just be that you're learning about what options there could be out there. And then of course, saying yes to opportunities you didn't think that you would have. I plan to ask you a little bit about how networking helped you get your role, but you both kind of already answered that, right? It sounds like that was really something that you made happen for yourselves. If you want to talk a little bit more about that, I would encourage you to. Please, I would love to hear. But if we could sort of fold it into the idea of mentorship. Is mentorship something now? Do you seek it out? Did you in the past? Do you serve as a mentor, either capital M or little m, depending on how you might define it, or what relationships are like with folks in your respective workplaces? And talk to me a little bit about what it means for you. It doesn't have a role in your life now.
Do you want me to kick off, Lauren?
that sounds great. Sure.
Awesome. Mentorship has been incredibly important throughout my career. And I wouldn't just say even my career. I think like this goes back even to my time at Barnard. I'm a relationship driven person, as I've already talked about at length. But I wouldn't have, for example, like gotten the internship that I got in college, gotten my first job out of Barnard, if not for those relationships. But I also look at mentorship and networking not necessarily as like a transactional relationship, not like, hey, I'm interested in this job, talk to me, right? Like that's why I really talk about it from the standpoint of relationships. And Stephanie, I like what you said around community as well. I seek out mentorship proactively, let's say with folks that are more like traditional mentors at key transition points in my career. So to give you an example of that, when we closed the eBay deal and I was still at the startup and was integrating into the subsidiary, I thought I would leave by that point. I even considered going into like venture capital and maybe working for portfolio companies. I had a whole idea of what my career could be, and I actually called my first boss, who I had post Barnard back during the Cuomo administration, who was working at Audible at the time, and we had lunch out in Newark, and I was like, hey, this is my plan, and also like I'm approaching my 30s and I'm thinking about child planning and what do I do? And she was really helpful in sort of talking me down to earth and making me look at my life in terms of like blocks of 3 years versus 5 years, which was helpful. But I think something that we often overlook and something that's so important in my life is also just like friends as mentors. I was really fortunate in that same first job post college. And we can have a separate conversation about like my ultimate boss there as Andrew Cuomo. So it's kind of ironic. But in my first job out of college, I was really fortunate to meet a really great network of women in that job. And these women are people I talk to every single day. I wish I could tell you that I was lying. Like we still have a group chat. It's been going on for I don't know what now, 12 years, where we talk to each other every single day. They're in completely different fields. One of them stayed in public service for a while. She now in her mid 30s in law school. So she's taken a totally different path. One of them also works in tech at Lyft. Another one works in NGOs and nonprofits. And anytime I have a really big issue, whether it's at work or personally, I gut check it with this group of women. And I just think it's really important just again, like navigating the world to have that. It doesn't necessarily seem like mentorship on the surface because these are people I now consider some of my best friends. But when you're navigating in my field, high stakes moments, but just generally, everything is relative. It's just really critical, I think, to have a support system around you that you can turn to for good advice and guidance. So that's kind of how mentorship looks to me. And then on the mentoring side, I love being a mentor. I actually work with Barnard students all the time. If anyone who's an undergrad at Barnard reaches out to me, I always respond every single time. I actually had the pleasure of meeting someone in their first year many, many years ago and worked with her all the way through her senior year. And we negotiated her starting salary, figured out that she wanted to go work at a law firm. She's doing super well now. And it's just awesome to see that progression. I really love to pay it forward because I wouldn't be where I am today without the people who took time to invest in me.
Your friends as mentors is just such a beautiful perspective and sentiment. I love that, Maddie. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And I want to say too, I love that Barnard has the mentorship program because I also do mentor some Barnard students and we've connected many, there's one in particular that I've worked with for a while and she's just great. She's really moving along and it's nice for her to have a bit of a sounding board and it's nice for me too to be able to put some of the skills and the things that I learned along the way to help someone else along that journey. So it is really fulfilling. I would say in terms of networking, for me, I am actually by nature very, very shy. So to get started with networking, I didn't really know what it was. Like I was very confused. And I would say to anyone who's wondering how to get started, first, find out what you're passionate about. Go interact with people in your area. Like figure out, okay, so if you're passionate about the arts, go find the societies, the concerts, the organizations, the places where other people who are holding the kinds of jobs that you might want to have eventually are going to be. Connect with fellow students in your major. Talk to your professors. I mean, what's great about Barnard is that it's a smaller school, so you know your mentors, you know your advisors really well. And for me, same thing as you, Maddie. My advisors became very close mentors. They really helped out along the way. And look to your peers too. That's actually really something we don't think of peers as mentors, but I think that's a brilliant idea that you just brought forward is they really are because we're all at different times, even if we're around the same age, we're all at different places in our career and we might have tried something that could be an inspiration to one of our friends. So building in that sort of peer communication and putting yourself in the places. I think again it comes down to opportunities are there if you're also in the spaces where those opportunities are available and open and posted and there's a certain amount of discomfort, right? Like any change, anything that's new, any time where you're going in as the least experienced person, you might have that feeling of like, do I belong here? Like, is this where I should be? And the answer is yes. And what always shocked me and sometimes continues to shock me is that people in general are always so helpful. Like they want to help, they want to give advice. That's not always the case, of course, but I would say 98% of the time people really want to look out for that next generation. So I have just found that, for example, with my now, my first boss here in the publishing world has now become a really close colleague. And so I will go to him, he's a friend now and a dear friend. And I will sit down with him and say, hey, this thing is going on. What do you think? Even when it's not directly related to my job, when it's related just more to broadly to our field and other opportunities that come along the way. Oh, hey, I've been asked to do this thing. What do you think? How's this publication? And it's great to have that sounding board. It's somebody that I really trust. And the same thing with the peers, to put yourself around a lot of other wonderful people who can help guide you and just can sometimes just to listen. Because sometimes that like you find you're talking and they might ask you questions and then you kind of come up with a new idea just from that interaction. So mentoring and networking, it's not like you said, Maddie, it's not as transactional as you might think. We think about networking and you're trying to obtain contacts. It's not about that so much as it is building relationships. And that takes time. That takes putting yourself, being the new person in the room in the space and reaching out like Maddie to reach out to the CEO and say, hey, can you give me a job? I'm interested in working with you. Like that's gutsy. But actually, if you keep doing that, you get more practice at it. And I think you become better at it over time. And then it just becomes part of what you do. You work a lot, you meet people, and then it becomes less of you don't have to think about it as much. You're naturally networking as you're working. So I think that's sorry, hope that wasn't too long.
No, absolutely. I think there's this definite recouching of networking, right, around what it can mean, around this like learning and expanding of the circle instead of it just being so transactional, Maddie, like you were saying. You've both touched on this a little bit in terms of sort of the backstory of what brought you to your current careers, but is there a moment or a decision that you made while at Barnard that you think really set you up for your trajectory? Something you did, someone you talked to, an event you attended. It doesn't have to be, the event that the sea change that shifted your life completely. But is there a moment that you can identify that kind of directed you on the path you're on now?
I think I had two, and I think that's where, so up until I sort of really felt passionate about at least exploring the music thing, I wasn't sure. I mean, I knew I loved psychology, and I thought I was like pretty decent at it. Like things looked good on paper, but I wasn't sure if I was confident enough to do it. And it was really my work with Walter Michel. We had this, it was a graduate level seminar, which is an awesome thing that you can do at Barnard. Which is you can take these, these graduate seminars and test your hand at what it might be like to be in graduate school. And so I took his seminar and ended up doing really well, mostly because of his guidance and the kinds of questions that he would ask and everything. And I thought it wasn't, it was very psych specific, but I think it was the confidence that that gave me to be able to work so diligently at something and to have that backing of like, hey, like you've got a knack at this, you should really consider this. It was a confidence boost. It was a very challenging, difficult class that took up hours and hours every week. But it was like this thing where someone to have someone who you really respect sort of say, hey, like this is, you could do this. It was that confidence building that I felt really sort of changed how I felt about myself in general. Like, oh, you can do really hard things sometimes. Like, and it's that gave me confidence so that when I eventually was like looking outside of that field, I thought, you know what? I know that I have some talent at this thing. I have an inkling that I might also want to explore this other thing. I wonder, let me give it a try. It gave me the confidence at least to look outside. And sometimes I feel like that's what a good mentor does. It's like they help find those good things about yourself. He's like, you're a really good writer, and I was like, oh, I never thought about that, And writing has been such a huge part of my life now. I write so much. In fact, that's what I spend most of my time doing, and so that if you hadn't said that, I might not have had that confidence. So yeah, I think that was the kind of in a way a bellwether moment where I was like, oh my goodness, if someone found something good about me that I didn't realize. So that was yeah, that was that.
I think mine might be similar now that I'm hearing Lauren talk. I think what Lauren's also kind of getting to a little bit, though hers is very practical, is for what I would say also the soft skills of it all. So I think like my decision, for example, my decision to double major, have a paying job and an internship. And back when we were in college, you could have unpaid internships, unfortunately. So a paid job was also important. But being able to navigate all of that and then the soft skills that I learned as a result. So like time management, the fact that I could do all these things, did I do everything perfectly? Probably not, but you get really good about, okay, where do I prioritize and spend my time? I think also from like a skills perspective, like the writing that I did within specifically my sociology major. Back then, we also had the 9 ways of knowing. I know that shifted at Barnard, but essentially those core courses that you're forced to take, like me with the psychology labs that I hated, but Lauren, I loved that you loved that. Just sort of challenging your brain to think in different ways and making you really flexible as a result. And I think that that's paid dividends throughout my career. And it's something I talk about a lot with undergrads because I know that there's this pressure around like my major is gonna dictate my entire career. And I think Lauren and I today are like living proof that that's not true. And you can major in art history and still go to law school, right? Like no one is necessarily, I hate to be the bearer of bad news if this is news to you, going to be hiring you because like you're a sociology expert at Barnard as an undergrad. And I think it's how you apply what you've learned, both in terms of your practical coursework and what you've studied, but then also take a moment to appreciate like how rigorous the college is and like how that is just going to set you up for success later in your career. You will be heads and shoulders if you take like a corporate route among some of your peers because like if you've had an internship and you know how to schedule an Outlook invite. It sounds so silly, but like not everyone gets access to the types of resources and opportunities that you have just by virtue of being in New York City, and then also having the support system of Columbia University and Barnard more specifically. So definitely don't sleep on that because I think that's why I've been able to be so successful throughout my entire career.
And sorry, if I could just jump in on that, Maddie, I think you bring up a great point, and I see this to everybody that I mentor, and a couple now of incoming students that I've spoken to, like to welcome as like a Barnard buddy. I said, and I always say the college is located in New York City. We are in a place where literally anything you might want to study, any kind of internship you might want to have, any kind of person you might want to meet, you can do it in New York City. Like, so the city is part of your campus. It's part of your college experience. Go out and do those internships, take those jobs. I know, and like you said, Maddie, too, that's another thing that, if you can balance a research job or like a teaching job or work outside of the college, like whatever it is, along with your studies, along with networking, along with the social life and all those things, by the time you graduate, you're going to feel quite competent in, like, my goodness, I can manage this all. And like you said, you will be head and shoulders above folks who maybe have only focused on one specific thing, or they haven't had all that. It's a good kind of pressure. Like it forces you to time manage. Just like, well, I've got this project due tomorrow, and also I have a 9 a.m. meeting, and also I have, and I have to prepare for this speech, and it's just the kind of thing where the more you can put yourself in those kinds of situations, and New York City is the perfect place to do it. It's right here. So take advantage of everything that Beyond Barnard offers, like all of the opportunities, because you're in the perfect place for it. So I just want to say, like, New York City is also your campus. So enjoy.
No notes on any of that. My goodness. So well said. Time management and project management are absolutely something all of you college students on this call are doing. You might not couch it that way, you might not define it that way, but it is absolutely true. And I think Lauren and Maddie have illustrated how helpful it will be in the future. Maybe kind of the last question or penultimate question here. I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about your industries right now, but specifically, what's something that has happened that's surprising, that was unexpected, something that just kind of took your breath away, or maybe in a small or a big way, about the industry that you work in, that you never would have guessed had you not landed the position you're in now.
I can jump in. I guess I would right now actually parse my industry into two parts. So, like, I consider my industry comms, but I am also working in tech. So, I'd be remiss not to talk about both. Also, I'm a non-technical person in tech, which comes with its own set of challenges. But focusing on the comm side of things, I think the thing that's so surprising is how small the industry actually is. You run into the same people, not just in New York, but I'm in California a lot in the Bay Area, and it's like the universe of reporters that you deal with, the universe of folks who are kind of coming up in their careers, or people that you're just going to run into for the rest of your life, which is a good thing. But I think like something that none of us really saw coming is just how the media landscape has shifted. I hate to be crass on this call, but like I think a lot of people have seen that it's kind of a bit of a shit show. I think what's happening, like on a national scale, also like a macro scale, is influencing the industry specifically. But I also think that presents a lot of very cool opportunities. So, for example, Substack wasn't a thing a couple of years ago, right? Like when I was coming up in PR, new media was social media. It was like, have you heard of this new thing called Twitter? Now you need to have a digital content strategy. And also, like, you need to be reaching out to journalists who are independent, who are writing their Substacks that are influential. Podcasts are huge right now, right? So I just think, like, yes, the media landscape has been disintermediated and disrupted, and also like there are no more rules, it feels like, anymore, just right now at the national level. So that presents a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for someone who is creative, who has ideas, who's thinking more strategically about how to pull all of this together. And then on the tech side, just to be really real with this group for a moment, um, we've made a lot of strides, I think, women in tech, especially non-technical women in tech. But I think something just to keep in the back of your mind is like there's still a lot of work to be done. So eBay is a great culture, and this is no shade to my current employer, but I think something that you just need to always be mindful of is just how to advocate for yourself in a traditionally male-dominated field. And I think that when you're a young woman coming up, just having that like thick skin, having those relationships become really important because you can kind of shut out the noise. But I would be remiss if I didn't just sort of make a comment on tech, especially because you read some horror stories in the media. It really has gotten a lot better. I'm really happy with my decision to sort of pivot and work in tech as a non-technical person, but want to be honest that I'm a very self-confident person. I have no qualms about advocating for myself, but those are skills that you kind of have to bring to the table, even today in 2026. Hopefully, Lauren has a more upbeat answer.
Well, it's tricky because I think I'm in a very different field, but I think some of the things, in terms of the media landscape, it is very sort of um, my field is very specific, and it's not going to get the same attention, for example, when a publisher does something as when eBay does something. But I think there's a lot of, there are a lot of voices there with very disparate opinions, and I think culture, because the arts and culture are interlinked. And there's a lot of new opera that's addressing some really important things. For example, I have a composer who has an opera that's touring now all around the States on the Lavender Scare, and it's called Fellow Travelers. It's a brilliant opera. It came out 10 years ago, and it's now on this major national tour. And they actually were one of the first groups that decided Washington National Opera was supposed to present it, and they said we're pulling it from the Kennedy Center as soon as it became the Trump Kennedy Center. And so, as the comms person here, then you have to start deciding like how we say these things and where we go next, and things like that. We also have another composer who wrote an opera called the Central Park Five, and that debuted at the new version debuted at Detroit Opera, to a huge fanfare, lots of press, and the same kind of thing where you get these interesting things, and then you have to decide what do we respond to, how do we respond. There's a lot of cultural conversations. And even because I work with a lot of international catalogs, everything from Tokyo to London to the continental Europe, South America, and of course the States. We every region has their own specific sort of ethos, and that was a new thing for me too, because when I think of opera, it's like every region has a different idea, and so what works really well in Europe may not work really well here in the States because of our different histories. And so when you're pitching, or when you're thinking of things, or when you're responding to press, you have to kind of think about like who you're talking to and what their assumptions are and what your assumptions are, and make sure you're on the same page. I've gone to conferences where things have gone really contentious because people are coming from very different frameworks, and I think they're all good people. They're all trying to come to it with good intentions, but you have to realize too that sometimes your own assumptions have to be challenged because you may be in a different space and you may be almost speaking a different language, sometimes literally, but also like figuratively. And it's my field too is also very well, I guess probably all fields are very economic dependent, right? So like the economy is doing what it's doing, and it certainly hits the arts. And so we're seeing a lot of challenges within companies to present the kinds of works that they would have presented well, before the pandemic. And so even getting over the pandemic with live music in general was a huge shift, but now sort of with the uncertainty in the economy, and then still getting over this COVID downturn that didn't quite get up in every area. And in the symphonic world we saw it come up, but in opera not as much. It's like figuring out how to navigate that and how to challenge companies to embrace things that might be a little bit more uncertain, especially when they're economically uncertain. So like pitching a new opera is always like, it's a little bit of a challenge, but then when you're sort of uncertain about your budgets and things, it's like it makes it doubly hard. So having to figure out how we pitch things differently, it's been a bit of a challenge for us, I think, especially in the post-COVID economy. So yeah, that's what I've found. There's just a lot of a lot of things you learn on the job that take you by surprise. But I think international markets and making sure that you're speaking kind of the same language and your assumptions are understood. That's something I learned.
I really love what you just said, Lauren, about like the global overlay as well. That's something that I confront on a daily basis in my role. My role is quite global, and I have a lot of fun with it. When the stakes are high, I think you need to kind of have a little bit of fun, but just like threading that like consistent message across everything, but understanding the nuances specific to the market is so critically important. And I think it's like how we do our jobs effectively.
Mhm.
So I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah, oh, of course. And even just working, you might be in the same company, but like your Tokyo office might function very, very differently than the London team does. And knowing how to work with your colleagues internationally, it's like you're in the same company, but everyone has a different style. And so the way you make asks and do things, it can be very different from office to office. So
Those are great. I love this conversation that's ensuing. I really think right now I would love to open it up to the students on the call and see if there's any questions, recommendations you might want, sort of burning desires you want to ask in this kind of forum with two really fantastic alums who are clearly here and willing to talk to you. Any questions from the gallery? I will pop in with a question, but please, if you have one, just open up your mic or raise your hand. We're very happy to entertain them. Let's start with advice, recommendations. You've talked about a lot of things, about very practical approaches, ways to meet people, to learn about things, to put yourself in spaces where there's other people that geek out about the same stuff as you, right? I love that. What are kind of one or two like top of mind, front of mind recommendations you have for students here or on campus that want to move in your direction? What action steps can they take now?
I can think of three that I will tie to the theme of today, though I can probably talk about this forever. My first one is, I think, to be really intentional about networking. Um, Focus on building genuine relationships with people. I've said this already throughout our conversation today, but when you're having these conversations, also please come prepared. Like be thoughtful, ask a lot of questions, but if someone is taking the time out of their day to talk to you and provide some advice, like come in just doing a little bit of research about who they are, what you may want to talk to about them. And then of course let the conversation go in the way that it goes. You'll probably learn something that wasn't on your list of 20 questions. The second one is something that Lauren kind of hit on a little bit earlier, but don't be afraid to ask for mentorship. Um, I agree with what Lauren said, like 90% of the time, someone's going to say yes. But I know it could be scary. It's a really vulnerable position to be in, but like, do not be shy. Like, reach out to people on LinkedIn, send a message. Like I said, if any Barnard student reaches out to me on LinkedIn, I always reply. And then finally, like, as it relates to the job process itself, outside of mentoring, I would say just be open to different entry points. Um, I know it feels like a long time ago that I was at Barnard, but I do recall the pressure. I know that you all are exceptional students, and there's a really high bar over there. It doesn't necessarily mean that your first job out of college needs to be at the United Nations. Like, if that is your goal one day to get there, there are just many other ways that you can get to that point and also get some like really great experience that maybe you wouldn't get at a larger organization, for example, right out of school. So really just again, I sound like a broken record, but just be open to opportunities and know that your first job out of school does not define your entire career because Lauren and I have proven that.
I've just typed up what you just said and put in the chat there, but being open to different entry points, Maddie, is so key. There's so many different ways to move within an organization or within an industry, even if it's like on the publishing side, which is what I know, Lauren, like you might come in on the marketing communication side and then pivot to editorial or vice versa. There's so many different ways to skin a cat.
yeah, no, I'm Maddie. I think you just made some really amazing points, and I love the coming prepared thing. One of the things I think I mentioned earlier, but this reiterates it, is that you want to be, if for any area that you're considering as a possible career, you want to know as much as possible about it. For me, it was like learning about the arts and who was doing what. So getting to as many concerts as I could, not because I had to for work, and I still do this. I want to hear who's writing what. If we haven't signed them, maybe we should sign them. It's like it's the kind of thing where you want to know your field really well, and especially when you're younger, if you are working with a mentor, you have approached somebody, it's great when you can ask them specific questions about the kind of work that they do. First of all, it helps guide the conversation, but it also, oh, this person really knows the field. Wow. Like, and I can say from my own experience mentoring one wonderful Barnard student over a course of time, she has come always prepared to our meetings with just some really great questions, oftentimes about opportunities that she has. And then she'll say, what do you think about this? And I'm between these two internships, and I'm kind of framing my materials this way. How would you write that? Like, and we just go back and forth and brainstorm, and she's got some really great ideas. And so I'll say, hey, you might want to check this out, or what, and we can work together. It makes the process a lot more productive in that way, and it shows like that the person really has an interest in this area, and what we do. And so I think like that's a great point. Come prepared, and know what you're asking for. And look, like we've said, most of the time mentors will respond, mentors will be in touch, and if they can't mentor you, they might have somebody else who can. And so there's always that networking. Don't be afraid to hear no, because what's the worst that happens? No, and then you go somewhere else. It's like just keeping yourself, as Maddy says beautifully, keep yourself open to the opportunities. And yeah, I would just say take advantage right now, since you're Barnard students, of everything that you have at Barnard in terms of like figuring out ways. You might have to take some classes. Again, for me, it was the 9 ways of knowing, and there were some ways of knowing that I was more keen on than others, right? But look, the freshman writing seminar was so important because I learned really how to streamline. I write well, maybe, but I'm not always as concise as I'd like to be. And I remember my professor was like, no, you can lose this, lose that, lose that. And well, that's really important when you're working in comms. You've got to be really direct and get to an important message right away. And so I credit a lot of that back to that freshman English class that I took at Barnard, right? So everything that you're learning now, try to think of ways that you can like draw from that. You may not see it right away, but that helps build what you're going to do later. And it never hurts to know as much as possible, like I said, about your field, about things that interest you, because you never know where that first job is going to be. You never know who you're talking to, and if you have something in common to talk about, that's great. It's a great way to get the conversation started. So read as much as you can, learn as much as you can, and be in the situations where you can meet the people that you actually really want to learn from.
Any other final thoughts from either of you, Lauren or Maddy? And again, Barnard students, you're welcome to ask questions if you want.
Maybe something that Lauren just said that like triggered a thought in my mind. You really don't know where people are going to end up. And I think that that's such a beautiful part of life, but I also feel like that's why the networking is so important. So many times throughout my career, and you've heard me already say, my industry is really small. You just run into people, or someone suddenly that you spoke to and had a conversation with is now working at your dream company, and you've left a really good impression. So when you reach out to them over there, they remember you. They're excited to let you know that an opportunity is going to open up. This just happened to me. I just recruited for a role on my team. I met an amazing young woman at an event hosted by my husband's firm, of all places. We were chatting. She was telling me, I want to leave PR agency. I really want to go in-house. I extended myself just to say that I've made the switch, always happy to share advice. A role opened up on my team. I sent it her way to see if she would be interested, and she crushed the process. And I just extended an offer to her on Tuesday. So you just never know like who you're going to meet, where you're going to meet, like put yourself out there, and like don't be so rigid again in terms of like what that entry point looks like.
Yeah.
And soft skills are so important. The impression that you leave I can't overstate it, but if a mentor takes time, for example, to meet with you, following up with a nice note afterwards, it just means a lot. Like it's like it takes 5 minutes of time, but it's really nice. Coming prepared and just showing your appreciation and your interest. It's like you may be then top of mind when, like you said, if something opens up, that person has already left a really good impression. You think, oh, that's somebody I'd want to work with. So yeah, those are just those important things too. Meet people and really just do your part to make the interaction a really good one. Yeah.
That's so great. I think that's a lovely note to sort of wrap things up with, unless there's any final questions from the students. I really would like to thank Lauren and Maddy for your time. Clearly, you've already dedicated so much time to Barnard students and furthering the Barnard cause and bringing great folks into the workforce. But I really appreciate it from our end here at Beyond Barnard. Thanks for joining us.
Of course. And to the students on the call today or whoever's going to be watching the recording, I'll speak for Lauren. Don't hesitate also to reach out. Like you can find us on LinkedIn. We love to mentor Barnard students. So
Yes,
if you have any
please.
questions that come up after this, we will make ourselves available to the extent we can.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have an absolutely stunning day if you're here in New York. It is a beautiful one.
Yes, go outside. Enjoy. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you both.
Thank you.